To some photographers, the idea of shooting on one single focal length might sound unimaginable. What if the best telephoto shot just appears in front of your eyes and the only thing you with you is a wide-angle prime lens? But what if I told you that limiting yourself to only one single prime lens might actually make you a better photographer? And I put it through the test. So over 3 months straight, I shot on only one single focal length, 35mm, and it actually vastly improved the way I shoot, and I'm sure it will improve your photography as well. So now let's get into it. So I divided up my journey in this experiment into 3 separate chapters. So let's start with chapter number 1, which is that you suck at 35mm photography at first. And there is multiple reasons why you will initially struggle with this focal length. So first of all, it's just simply the wide field of view. There is so much in your scene, it is relatively hard to get rid of distractions and create clean compositions. Additionally, you might encounter flaws in your specific lens. For instance, my 35mm lens has an equivalent aperture of f3, meaning that there is basically no way to really separate your background given the f3 aperture, but also the wide-angle nature of the lens. Additionally, you will soon realize that at f3 it is harder to get cleaner photos in low light, and since I did this experiment in winter and it's like dark 80% of the time, you will have to optimize your settings in order to get the best out of the lens that you have. And finally, you also ask yourself the what if question. What if I had never started this experiment in the first place? What if I had started the experiment but with a 50mm or an 85mm lens? Or what if the best telephoto shot actually emerges in front of my eyes and there is no way for me to capture it? And all of these challenges, issues, and worries combined will initially make your photos suck. They will not be good, and it's part of the process. And as you will see in the second stage, your photos will actually quickly improve. In the second step of this process, you will adapt. And you will adapt in several ways. First of all, you adapt because you get a better sense of where you have to stand relative to your subject and relative to the scene in front of you in order to get everything properly in the frame. Second, you will adapt because you will see different ways to allocate these different elements in your frame and create impactful photos by, for instance, using leading lines that guide the viewer deeper into your scene and probably toward your subject. You will also use foreground element to block off some parts of that wide-angle field of view that might otherwise distract from your scene. And you will also get a grasp of how to read the light, and most notably how to use direct light, like backlighting techniques, for instance, to really make your subject stand out while obscuring stuff that is distracting from your scene into the shadows of that scene. And additionally, due to the nature of the 35mm focal length, you'll also have just consistency in your field of view. So the relationship between your subject and the background will stay about the same. So overall, this second step of you adapting and actually knowing how to use the focal length happens like after 1 month of using the focal length, for me at least. And as you will see, it is also the most exciting and fulfilling part of the journey because you finally know how to master that single focal length. But as you will see in the next step, this excitement and fulfillment about your work will sadly not last for very long. The next chapter on your journey is that you fall into a creative rut. You know how to use this focal length and your photos are consistently good, but you're not fulfilled by the way you shoot. And the reason why you fall into this creative hole is not because your work has gotten worse, but most notably because your expectations in yourself have gone up. And this is often where you have this breakup point. You dislike the way you shoot, you dislike the way you edit, you're not happy with your results, and that's perfectly normal. It's part of the journey. It's part of you getting better at using that one focal length. And now most people would probably rely on a different focal length to overcome that creative down, get inspired again, and take great photos again. But sadly, since we just shoot on one single focal length, that's not a real option for us. And this is exactly where the final step on your journey starts, which will also become the most rewarding step on your journey. The final chapter on your 35mm photography challenge only will be that you get creative. In other words, you will have to think outside of the box. And one way I started to become more creative is to rely on longer exposures. So far, I've always tried to just freeze my action in time and not really have any blur, any shake, any movement in my photo at all. But this changed once I experimented with longer exposures. So instead of exposing for, let's say, 1/100th of a second or more, I decided to go for 1/15th of a second or 1/4 of a second or even up to 1 second to expose my scene. And it really gave a completely different look to my photos. There was movement to my photos. There was these light trails in my photo. You could literally see how everything in the scene was more dynamic. And it really just gave this extra touch to the photos. But if you want to shoot longer exposures, bear in mind that you either need to have a stabilized camera or a stabilized lens to actually pull that off. Otherwise, you would have to rely on a tripod. And me personally, I hate to carry around tripods. I hate to set them up. I hate to dismantle them again. And I just hate to use them in general. So make sure to have either a stabilized camera or a stabilized lens if you consider doing longer exposures too at this stage of the journey. The next way I got more creative, or I thought more out of the box, is to crop my photos. So instead of just taking the focal length and the field of view that I had as a given, I decided to crop into my work and actually get a different perspective. And please let me know if you think that cropping in a 35mm challenge only is cheating, but in my opinion, it's just a way to just get something different and maybe also make your composition more concise. And I know that many photographers are hesitant to crop their photos because they think that they're gonna lose some quality and some resolution. But from experience, I can tell you that nobody will tell whether your photo has 40 megapixels, 12 megapixels, or 4 megapixels. So crop into your photo, create something that is different, and don't just rely or take that 35mm focal length as a given, because you can do so much more and create more impactful photos if you crop in. Like for instance, I had this one photo of the moon I created, and initially on 35mm, the moon is like relatively small in the frame, but by cropping in, I got this photo right here, which actually shows the moon much bigger, making it have more impact in an overly better shot, which is only possible because I cropped into my photo. And then a final way on how to become more creative with a 35mm focal length is to take a step back from the photos you usually take. For instance, in my case, I take high contrast, relatively fine art photos, and now I shifted my work more towards a more documentary style to document more about my own life, not only including people in my photos, but also sometimes immovable subject, if that makes sense. Because sometimes taking a step back from the photos you usually take allows you to embrace different types of photography, different genres of photography that you can to some degree incorporate in your own photographic vision, and overly makes you take better photos. In my opinion, photography thrives to limitations. Limitations to the gear you use, not using the brightest glass or the biggest censored cameras, and as hopefully demonstrated in this video, also limiting yourself to one single focal length will eventually make you a better photographer. And if you want to see more of these challenges on my channel in the future, make sure to subscribe to the channel, as it would enormously help this channel grow. And with that being said, thank you so much for staying until the end, and I hopefully see you in next week's video. Bye.